talked about Chomsky saying, basically agreeing that a ethnic cleansing did happen in 1947, but that it is unrealistic to encourage the refugees to come back. And you said that Chomsky accepts the facts, but this is a political judgment, yes, and that he is right to his opinion and everything. And at the same time, you looked at Hamas, and you said that Hamas has been ambivalent, that they say they do not want to recognize Israel, but they're ready to have a truce. And I was just wondering, if you knew Hamas, where they're coming from, their political tradition, their historical tradition, their religious tradition, as well as you knew the tradition from which Chomsky is coming, would you probably give them as much a slack as you give Chomsky? In other words, for how long should the Arabs and Muslims could only ask for what is morally acceptable to the liberal left? The liberal left has never been anti-colonialist, whether in Britain, when Britain was an empire. The liberal left now in Britain wants to manage the war. They're not against the war. They want to manage the occupation of Iraq. They're not against it. The liberal left, including Benny Morris, Benny Morris has been traveling around the world for 10 years as a voice from the peace camp before people woke up to him and what he was saying. Chomsky wants us to believe that Israel is just like Nicaragua or any third world country that is, a lackey of the United States. But he wants us to say that Israeli F-16s should be called American F-16s with an Israeli pilot.
No, I don't think that's really fair. People can judge for themselves the record, and Professor Chomsky has ample capacity to defend himself. So I'm not going to take on that role. I'm going to simply say what I understand the record to be. Let me give you an example. You look at the Camp David negotiations in 2000, when the United States, Israel, and the Palestinian representatives met, and you examine the negotiations. The negotiations showed that by the very end, I don't want to get into the technical stuff, the arcana, because you won't follow it. There's no reason why you should. It's just very technical. At the very end, in December of 2000, President Clinton put forth what came to be called the Clinton parameters for resolving the conflict. And the Clinton parameters basically said the Palestinians would get about 94 to 96% of their territory, maybe 1% from Israel in a land swap, and there would be a sharing of Jerusalem. The famous formula was what's Jewish would go to Israel and Jerusalem, what's Arab will go to the Palestinians. Now, it's not, in my opinion, yet a desirable resolution of the conflict. There were a lot of problems with the Clinton parameters. They then negotiated again, not Clinton, but the Palestinians and the Israelis. They negotiated in a place called Taba in Egypt in January 2001. And in the Taba negotiations, there were they moved closer to a reasonable resolution of the conflict on the questions of territory, Jerusalem, and so forth. Why do I mention it to you? Because the area where there was relatively no movement, almost no movement, was the question of the refugees. On the question of the refugees, Israel barely budged, maybe taking back several tens of thousands of refugees, a token return. Well, that was the maximum expression of Palestinian political strength at that moment. And the truth of the matter was, Clinton was desperate for some sort of settlement because he wanted to erase the Monica Lewinsky legacy and have a Carter legacy. And he was hoping, so he did put pressure. But there was relatively little movement on that refugee question. The reasonable inference from the record is Palestinians and their supporters haven't even begun to summon even the minimum amount of political power required to implement that right of return. So when Professor Chomsky says in his judgment in the real world, given the current balance of forces, it's unrealistic, there is an argument there. It's not because he has some, secret Zionist aim or desire. You look at the record, and this is the reasonable conclusion that you draw from the record. And I think honest people can reach that conclusion. And it doesn't bear at all on the legal and moral issues, where he's well within the camp of the international consensus. I'm not saying he's right, but there's certainly a rational argument for it. When you look at the record, the Israelis were about ready to let go maybe 95% of the West Bank, which is something. But on the refugee question, they were barely willing to give anything. So if you can show me where the political strength is going to come to change that, then I'll say, yes, Professor Chomsky's calculus is wrong. But until you can show it to me, it's just pie in the sky, and it's empty sloganeering.
We're just going to take one last question, and then